Sarah Spain, Pablo Torre, Kevin Blackstone. The breaking news of the day, and it's huge. Big Ten football postponed until the spring. And now, do the dominoes fall? Or do other conferences try to play through? Or do singular schools, Nebraska, one of them that's floated this idea, try to play out of conference? What happens to all those players in the Big Ten? Sarah, around the horn to you. What do you think of the Big Ten's decision, and do you view this as the end of college football in 2020?
Well, it's noteworthy to me yesterday when I was reminded that the Big Ten has two presidents that are physicians. And ultimately, these decisions are up to the president of these schools, not coaches, not even athletic directors. So I'm not that surprised by this decision. As for Nebraska announcing and Scott Frost saying, we'll play whoever, whenever, I don't think that's realistic just because conferences are essentially designed for the money distribution and the television rights. I don't know if because this is such an extenuating circumstance with the season not happening this fall, whether they'd be able to get out of a contract and go try to negotiate elsewhere. I don't think it's that realistic that will happen. As for the effect on college football overall, it certainly feels like the information is getting to different conferences and they're going with whatever they're getting. So the MAC conference commissioner says that their medical board said it's completely untenable to marry COVID and college football this fall. Meanwhile, a Duke doctor is telling ACC folks, we can do this. There is some risk, but we can make it work. The ACC and the SEC seem convinced to continue kicking this can down the road and push and fight as hard as they can. So I don't know that it's immediate, although I think inevitably we will see a fall without football.
So to answer that question, then you do believe this could be and is the end of college football in 2020. Eventually. After those other conferences stop kicking the can. Pablo Torre, same questions to you.
Yeah, with all due respect to the Nebraska Autonomous Zone and whatever comes of that, this feels like the beginning of the end, Tony. And I will remind you, just last week, we had charts, beautiful color-coded charts showing the Big Ten schedule. And so the detective story here to me is what changed in the last several days? Because I would like to believe that medical wisdom is guiding these conferences, the Big Ten and the Pac-12, in this case. But the bigger story in the news has been the organization of athletes. We have had hundreds upon hundreds of college football players organize, and that, to me, is the biggest change in the news cycle. So as a cynic, as a skeptic who has also talked to some of these players in that movement, one of the concerns and big questions I have is, would these conferences ultimately prefer cancellation/postponement as opposed to the hard reform that these athletes are asking for? Because remember, what they are asking for most immediately right now is a standardization, a mandate and not guidelines about how to play in a safe and healthy way given the coronavirus. That is something we still have not seen, and I imagine that becomes a sticking point across all the conferences by the time this whole storyline is done.
And Kevin Blackstone, Big Ten football says no fall. We'll try it in the spring. What happens now?
Well, I guess they will stick to this plan that they've just come up with. But I've thought all along, as you know, and I've said and I've written, that college sports were not going to happen this year. They just can't happen under these conditions. And the only reason that we're hearing from these Power 5 conferences now that they're shutting down is because they have the most to lose. As we all know, this is all about money. There's $4 billion tied up with the Pac-5, the Power 5 conferences when it comes to football. They have linked themselves to this for-profit, faux non-profit outlet called football, and now they are trying to hold on to it, and they realize how crazy this whole situation is. And back to Pablo's point, it's not only the students. The college athletes who have organized around this, also their parents have organized around this and been very, very vocal. And there are a lot of new people involved in college athletics and college organizations in the Power 5 who just are not as wedded to this sort of exploitation as some of their predecessors. And I think that all has come to a fruition here.
I want to go through a thought exercise here, though, where the Big Ten says no fall football, but other conferences can still say yes. Could we try that? Sarah, you brought up Dr. Cameron Wolf from Duke. I want to read what he said to Sports Business Daily today. He's a Duke infectious disease specialist who chairs the ACC's medical advisory team. Quote, We believe we can mitigate it down to a level that makes everyone safe. Can we safely have 2 teams be in the field? I would say yes. Will it be tough? Yes. Will it be expensive and hard and lots of work? For sure. But I do believe you can sufficiently mitigate the risk of bringing COVID onto the football field at a level that's no different as a student on campus. Pablo, you've said long that we should be listening to doctors. You had Dr. Fauci on your podcast, ESPN Daily. Here's a doctor from Duke thinking there could be a season. How should that factor into the ACC's decision-making process?
I would like to see, Tony, a transparent and in full disclosure discussion among these health experts, because the ACC doctor, there's no question that he has a resume that is worth considering and listening to, but I want to hear what the other experts have to say, because what Dr. Fauci told me and what he has said this whole time is that even on top of the notion that these individual athletes can accept some risk to their own person, right? Even if we wave away the notion that they can't actually negotiate for their own health care protections because they're not professionals, let's say they even admit that we're going to take on a certain amount of risk. What about the notion of spread? Like, this to me is the big difference between concussions, which is the obvious metaphor here. Like, we know there are risks, we are going to mitigate them and also opt into them, knowing all of that, full disclosure. Well, what about the notion that, unlike with concussions, this spreads to your community? And the whole asymptomatic thing, as a last point here, it's seen now as a win for players because you're young and healthy and you don't show signs of the virus. Remember, back in February, March, that was the nightmare component of the virus because you did not know who would get it as a result. So I am also concerned, equally concerned, about college athletes being a vector of the spread as opposed to merely them suffering as well.
Kevin, can I ask your view on a doctor like Dr. Cameron Wolfe on ACC's advisory board saying, yes, we can mitigate this?
Well, they can mitigate it, but they can't eliminate it. And what skin is it off of his nose, because he's not the one being affected by this? I mean, I was lucky enough to have that audio tape of the SEC meeting drop into my email box the other week and listen to the concern on the athletes who were calling in asking medical professionals about the long-term and short-term impacts of this COVID-19 if they happened to get it. And there was no medical expert on there that could tell them that that risk would be absolutely off the table, that there were a lot of things that they still didn't know. Mm-hmm. So it's very easy, and I understand it's clinical for a doctor to be able to say that, but the doctor is not the one who is at risk. And as long as you are using the word risk, it's problematic.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sarah Spain, you brought up Cameron Wolfe before, the doctor in the ACC. I also want you to consider Nick Saban's comments from this week as well. He had the numbers to demonstrate his football team's positive test rate was far lower than the national average, of course, and then even the state of Alabama and on-campus students.
Well, maybe his specific case, but we've certainly seen other programs that have been in the 20s and 30s, right? And that was before full official practices. That was before traveling. That was before other students came on campus and parties. And that girl you really like, that if you don't show up to that place that's got 100 people, you maybe not get to see her again, right? Like, all the things that come with being a college student are already limited in terms of being an athlete. You need to protect your body. You need to make good decisions. But to an extent that's almost unbelievable here, when you could look at $1 million professional athletes that can't keep themselves from going to bars in Chicago and going to grab some milk or a casino or whatever. We're now asking that of college students. Of course, you can mitigate the risk by very expensive testing and protocols, but you can't eliminate it, like Kevin said. And if this is not necessary, then on whose shoulders will a death lie? Or a serious illness, the myocarditis, the heart condition that is now being linked to people who have recovered from COVID but have this heart condition that can be extremely dangerous, especially for athletes. Who will take on the responsibility of that becomes an issue for these athletes? And so, yeah, he can tell them this and they can go off of that and decide to move forward because of his recommendation. The skin off his back, I guess, to Kevin's point, would just be that he gave the A-OK that made them feel comfortable doing it, and now you move forward risking a bunch of young people.
I guess it should always be said, as you say that, it's risking young people. It's also every person the young person may come in contact with. So then, I mean, it's hard to trace exactly who they've come in contact with. It's not just hospitalizations of the young people, it's who they've come in contact with. Kevin, did you want to add to that?
And I just have to underscore once again, when we talk about Power 5 conference football, we're talking about rosters that are over 50% black. And we're talking about communities that those black athletes go back to that are 5 times more likely to be hit by COVID-19 than any other community. Right. And that needs to be taken into account.
So I started this conversation with the news that the Big Ten was pausing the fall and they're going to try to do it in the spring. And I mentioned dominoes. That's the other conferences, the ACC, the SEC, the PAC, as their Big 12, as they're trying to figure out whether they play in the fall. But are there any other dominoes here we're talking about, Pablo, with players? Will Big Ten players who have an NFL future want to play in the spring? Does that make a season viable for them? Could they possibly try to transfer out, especially if they've already got enough credits and graduated? Could they transfer out and play immediately in another conference that decides to play? That just popped in my brain. That may be completely unattainable. But how about you, Pablo? What do you think of it?
No, there's no question there are concerns that these schools have about losing their highest profile prospects. Will Trevor Lawrence want to play if the ACC ends up playing in the spring? And the NFL, by the way, has made very clear they're not going to move the draft. I think the product we're going to see in college football will be so different as to demand a reevaluation of, is this actually the sport we wanted at all? And
so
I think the answer probably is going to be no.
Is the sport that college football and college football fans want to see. Sarah Spain, how about you?
Well, I mean, listen, if they decide to just push everything off, then the SEC could finally just join the NFL and we could find out if Alabama would beat the Browns for once. I mean, I've been waiting years to find that out. No, I don't think it's that reasonable that players will try to transfer last minute, and I do think there will be some very high-end players that won't want to participate that close to the draft. But the amount of money that can be made and the sort of close enough product that would be on the field, I think would be worth it for those.
Getting suspended. Laureano, 6 games for his role in that brawl. Yes, it was a very active role in the brawl. Houston coach Alex Sintra, 20 games for his role in it. No Astro players. Buy or sell, Kevin Blackstone?
So you got to sell it. I mean, this is Major League Baseball's problem from the jump when they didn't do to the Astros what other teams are now doing to the Astros on the field. This is completely unfair. It's very disingenuous, and Major League Baseball should have cleaned this up in the first place by handing down the punishments that they should have done.
Pablo Torre?
Yeah, I sell it too, Tony, because Laureano was hit 3 times when he was playing the Astros. I just wonder why that third hit by pitch didn't result in someone else getting suspended, one of the players. But I also understand, given all the protocols around COVID, you do have to suspend Laureano too, even if the name of his mom was invoked, which is certainly something that I understand as a human, but
and been
pandemic
as
times.
Well. Okay. Sarah Spain, how about you?
I'm so tired of people saying, but he said this about my mom, or he called me the B word. Just toughen up. Who cares? But in the grand scheme of things, I agree with KB. Unfortunately, you can't do a makeup call repeatedly across the season where anyone's allowed to do anything to the Astros without punishment. He was involved in this, and Tron got more of it. It seems pretty fair as far as length of suspension goes.
Well, length of suspension, 6 games for starting a brawl in a pandemic that is not socially distanced. And it was 8 games, right, for Joe Kelly for making faces. That's what we've got so far, besides no suspension for any Astro player this year. We'll move on. Buy or sell, too. You got LeBron James, you got Anthony Davis, and you have the ball in Kyle Kuzma's hands to win it. The 3 giving LA their first win in a week since sealing the 1 seed. Kuzma said nothing would stop him from shooting that shot. Jesus could be guarding him, and he'd still shoot over Jesus. So, game-breaking and commandment-breaking, Kuzma. That it was LeBron inbounding and Vogel drawing up the play for Kuzma means what to you, Sarah?
I heard a lot of great jokes on the internet that I'm not going to share here about whether he could cross up Jesus.
I appreciate it because I wasn't really thrilled with that. Okay, go ahead.
You'd expect them to go to LeBron or Anthony Davis, which is why the entire team went to LeBron or Anthony Davis, and he was wide open. This is a good thing for the Lakers. Instead of arguing, why didn't they set up one of their guys? They set up another guy, and if he's able to make those shots, that's good for them going forward.
Pablo?
And Kuzma didn't even need to invoke my Lord and Savior. He shot over Bol, Tony. Bol has a 7'8" wingspan. We get it. You'll shoot over everything. The issue is that Frank Vogel after the game also said when Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is back and healthy, he's going to start over Kyle Kuzma, which tells me that Kyle Kuzma has more things going on in his life to be concerned about than just his willingness to shoot over stuff.
Kevin Blackstone?
Well, we used to talk about just recently, right, a team having a big three. Well, last night they had a big three. That was 80 points from those three guys. So whether Kuzma was hitting that last shot, them taking confidence in him to allow him to do that, or what he did during the entire game, that is good news for the Lakers going forward.
Buy or sell 3, we go to the Hubble. We made it. Playoffs. Hockey, Stanley Cup, let's go. Flyers and Knights are the top seeds. Buy or sell playing well in the round robin tournament, meaning anything as we hit the real thing. Kevin?
Well, you know what? I kind of like the Blue Jackets right now just because of the way they took care of the Maple Leafs, and they got the Lightning, and they took out the Lightning, a year ago. I think they are as much of a danger as anybody in this shortened format, and I know a lot of people like the Knights, but I'm going to go with the Blue Jackets.
Tori?
I like the Flyers, Tony, specifically because the Philadelphia Flyers had 4 players to score at least 20 goals in the regular season. In this round robin that they were great in, 0 of those players scored. So there is still so much more for those players to do.
Good stuff.